Hey folks, welcome back to the Meta Abuse Podcast. I'm your host Ben, or Battle Mode, and I've got DasTactic with me today.
Hi Ben, how you going? And welcome everyone. Looking forward to this discussion.
I'm going pretty good, thanks Daz. And we've got a very special guest today to celebrate the launch of Emperor of the Fading Sun's enhanced version on Steam. We've got Andrew Greenberg.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I'm the one without an accent. All right. My accent's just not nearly as cool as theirs.
Oh, it's going to be one of these discussions, is it?
Oh man, totally used to it. So yeah, Andrew, Emperor of the Fading Suns, tell us a little bit about it and tell us a little bit about yourself as well, please, because I think that you are likely to be one of the most experienced games designers I've ever interviewed. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about yourself.
All right, well, humanity reached the stars, created the perfect society, and messed it all up. And now you're trying to rebuild it. Okay, so that's enough about me. Let me talk about the game. No, okay, so that's the background of the Fading Suns universe. We saw humanity built this great Second Republic, universal emancipation, great technologies, and then the folks who wanted to basically take it all for themselves did and sent the rest of humanity hurtling back into the Dark Ages. And of course, they followed along behind them. So this was a project from a number of us, and it actually began at a computer game developers conference back in the mid-90s. So I was originally at a company called White Wolf, where I was the original developer of a game called Vampire the Masquerade, tabletop role-playing game, and brought in a friend of mine. Bill Bridges was the original developer of our game, Werewolf of the Apocalypse. And we'd been there, but we were definitely ready to strike out on our own, not too happy with what the company was doing, a lot of things. And at a computer game developers conference in Santa Clara, California, we ran into two computer game developers from where we were in Stone Mountain, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. And so we were talking, we got into a good conversation in the bar about what would religion look like way, way in the future. And that's really what led to Emperor of the Fading Suns. I have to admit that the church we have in Emperor of the Fading Suns looks nothing like what we postulated sitting in the bar in Santa Clara at the Computer Game Developers Conference. But it was a great springboard for this. So we formed with the guys who'd formed several Dudes Holistic Gaming. They'd made some computer games already, Battles of Destiny, Hammer of the Gods, getting ready to launch Machiavelli the Prince. They'd done Merchant Prince. We got together. We released Merchant Prince with Microprose. Originally, Emperor of the Fading Suns was supposed to be with Microprose. And that's right when they got bought by Spectrum Holobyte. Some of the outside projects disappeared. So we had to scramble and got taken on by Segasoft at the last minute in order to publish this game. So really had hope. We were working originally with Sid Meier's and other greats on this title. And we're disappointed not to finish with them. But Emperor of the Fading Suns, we still worked on. And the idea is, as I mentioned, it is how do you rebuild humanity after some massive collapse, decline, when things fall apart? How do you build it back up? And the whole idea, the whole reason behind our company's name, Holistic Design, was that we could get a holistic view to game development and combine a computer game, a tabletop role-playing game, fiction, live-action game, card gaming, etc. Bill Bridges and I had worked on the Eternal Struggle card game, which is a vampire collectible card game. We'd done the Rage card game, which was our werewolf card game. Both those had done very well. So we're very excited about all these different areas we could combine. And Fading Suns, the Fading Suns universe was our first effort at doing that. So the computer game, humanity has been in this dark ages for a long time. And another fellow, Vladimir, had tried to bring humanity out of it and been assassinated for his troubles and had plunged humanity back into the dark ages. And now 5 royal houses are all trying to get to the lead. And if you succeed, you can start the effort to bring humanity out of those dark ages. Bring back beneficial technology, start curing some of these damaged areas, and so forth. So you play the computer game, and when you win, that sparks a tabletop role-playing game. And suddenly, instead of being one of the 5 princes of the 5 royal houses, you are now an adventurer trying to serve that emperor's wishes and continue rebuilding what humanity has lost. So I see this cool technique where you got a hand raised. So since I've been doing my expository narration, DasTactic, why don't I turn it over to you?
Yeah, we have this little process so that we don't end up sort of talking over the top of each other too much, although even that can be pretty fun anyway. But just the...
What? How do you mean?
Because otherwise Daz and I upset each other.
Yeah, Andrew, one thing I'm fascinated with is like the way that you sort of are talking about the way that you sort of started. It sounds like you didn't start off actually in a computer, like a computer developer mode yourself. It was more sort of like a, as you said before, with the holistic design, sort of something even higher. Like, is the world building and sort of getting those sort of concepts where you always would sort of be wanting to start with anything, and then the computer is sort of more like just a secondary element that comes in to make things work. It seems like when you play the game, it's the thing that strikes me, like when I first started playing it, and I've only been playing it a very short period of time, is just how incredible the actual lore is that's been sort of structured in around the game, and it just works.
Each of these media have their own strengths for revealing secrets and key areas. So computer games really allow for this grand exploration at a very high level what's going on in a setting. So when I was working at White Wolf, I also started doing computer games. I got contacted. Viacom was trying to get into computer games, and they did a game called Dracula Unleashed, and Bill and I came in and did the script for that one. Unfortunately, it only sold 1 million units, and Viacom thought that was too few, so they didn't do any more there. But then we worked with Interplay on Star Trek Starfleet Academy. So Bill and I are part of the team that wrote the last lines of dialogue Shatner has ever delivered as Kirk. They killed him off in Generations. We already had him under contract. So those are the last lines he's ever officially delivered as Kirk.
That's incredible.
That's cool.
But it was very cool how we could explore these IPs, Dracula, Star Trek, in both very specific ways and very macro ways, very macro and micro. And that was very much what we wanted to do with Fading Suns. What is it like to be someone who can really change the course of human destiny? Would you use your powers for good, for ill? Would you build humanity up, or would you just loot all this stuff for yourself? And then in the RPG, what happens when you're not born with that power, but you have the chance to gain it through your actions over a long time? And that's the RPG where you get your experience, become more powerful, become more of a factor in the universe. And I love when people do this well, how you can explore different areas of an idea, of a concept, of a franchise in different media. And it makes a big difference. I mean, I think that folks like the Russo brothers do this really well, taking comics into movies. Whereas comics, you're really exploring, getting into the nitty gritty because you can sit there and pore over it and read it. The movies are very much about that emotional experience that we all had when we first sat down with a comic book and opened it up and started reading and said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then we get jaded because, well, we get jaded. And then you recapture that kind of emotional grandeur in a movie. And that's what I think that a lot of folks in computer games, when a computer game does it well, does it really well. Baldur's Gate 3 does such a good job with that. I mean, I love playing tabletop role-playing games, all kind, D&D, everything else. Fading Suns, obviously, play Fading Suns. Baldur's Gate gives you such a feeling for that setting and being a part of it that almost nothing else can do. So I love folks who will take these media and explore great ideas in new ways.
I think it's fascinating as well that you actually built the game around lore, essentially. You know, usually you would kind of come up with the game design first, I think. You know, you'd come up with your mechanics and games design first, but to actually come at it from, you know, to try to get all that into the lore is quite remarkable. The other thing that's absolutely remarkable, by the way, is that the game design for a 4X game is incredibly tight. And just for the audience, I want to put it into perspective. Some of the contemporary games that came out, like in the years surrounding Emperor of the Fading Suns, we had games like Master of Orion 2, Battle at Antares, which came out the year before, which is a classic and by many people regarded as one of the best, games that was made in that genre. We had Stars a couple of years before that, but it wasn't really seen until about 1996 as another classic game. Civilization 2 was 96. Ascendancy was a year before. There was a Star Wars Rebellion or Supremacy, which came out a year later, which is also an amazing game. Imperium Galactica and Deadlock. So this game came out in the golden era of, the kind of like gold rush towards 4X. And the fact that Emperor of the Fading Suns stands today, even now, in my opinion, as one of the best 4X games that's ever been made, is partly to do, I think, with the fact that the lore drove the mechanics. You had this idea, this kind of the great houses, you had the idea with the scepters, which gives it a very unique victory condition, that everything flows down and cascades from this unique victory condition, including the resource economy. There's just stuff in this game that you cannot do today in today's market because it would be considered to be too big or too complex.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, a lot in there, and I really appreciate the praise for it. You talk about an era in time. And a number of those games you mentioned were with Microprose. And we were with Microprose at that time. Yeah, just what we could have had if Spectrum hadn't bought that company. I mean, Spectrum, fine enough, but it wasn't the Microprose of yore, with the Civ 2s, Masquerade, etc. So
UFO, all those greats. Yeah.
Yep. Oh,
yeah.
XCOM. Yeah. There was so much good stuff coming out of there. And yeah, so the idea certainly was to have the lore work across it, but the games also informed the lore. So things like jump gates, that was one of our computer game design partners specifically said, I need choke points in the game I'm designing. I don't want free flying armadas. I want folks to have to go through choke points and have space battles. And one of the things people love about EFS is the fact that you do fight on land, air, sea, and in space, and space to ground, and so forth. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're flying through space, it's a huge area. You're not going to see other ships unless you're both going to a specific point where you will fight, generally over planets around the jump gates, etc. So yeah, I mean, we did this lore. It was great. We all loved coming up with it, but some of it was definitely informed by what we wanted the games to accomplish.
Andrew, actually, now I've got two questions. I had one question because we were talking about lore before, but now we're talking about sort of space travel. I'll go back to lore and just sort of ask, one aspect about the game, or even just a comment about the game. The archives that are actually part of they're almost like the help file within the game itself, but they're actually well beyond that because they are the lore from the perspective of the church. It's a very interesting mechanic, or even just a way of approaching information within a game. And it's interesting because you don't really get distilled information when you actually open up the archives, but you do get a distorted view of information from the perspective of one of the entities within the game itself. What's the thought process behind doing that? Is that just to get more immersion, or was it something that you guys just decided to actually do?
The immersion was key. We wanted you to really feel like, what is that environment? You read that stuff, you know exactly what a person there, a sinner in the hands of an angry pancreator, feels about the universe. But also, we were trying to simulate the idea of coming out of the Dark Ages. So with Merchant Prince and Machiavelli the Prince, we'd done Renaissance era games where humanity was coming out of the Dark Ages and already out of there, which really loved that period already. But then now you're in the Dark Ages trying to struggle out of it. And we wanted players to feel that idea of, you really don't know everything. What you know is drastically colored by this crazy religion and by the lack of actual education that people have. 95% of humanity, when the game starts, are supposed to be serfs. They have no education. Reading and writing is rare. So what they know of these things is in these archives. So we wanted to try and put that feeling on the player. So many games give you all the information, and that's important in these games. And I think we actually erred a little bit on too little player information. The archives are a great example. You don't know exactly what this tech does, except, boy, does a whole idea of power legions, marauders, pestulators, kestrel, hover anti-tanks, mnemonic armor, etc. That is psychosocial engineering. All of this looks really cool. What the heck does it do? You got to make it to find out. That's why there's not actually a tech tree. One of the reasons there's not actually a tech tree in the game. Another reason was we're changing things around at the very last minute with techs. Another example that we changed for this edition was you can build cities and they collect resources, but you don't know how much resource they collect until you're actually on that hex. Now there's that resource tool that shows you where you can build, and our players love it. Biggest quality of life improvement, better than the graphics changes, better than all the new modding tools, better than how we changed the sex and clergy, etc. They just love that they can now hover around, mouse around, and they'll see where all the resources are. But again, partly on purpose, we wanted you to feel that idea of not knowing everything. And we erred too much on that side. So now you're seeing some of that go back.
I actually think that one of the saving graces for the way that technology works is, for the game is, actually mostly what the technology does is unlocking new units and occasionally giving you a few more economic buildings. It's quite focused in that respect. So even though, as Daz was saying, he was like skirting around this, but I think that there is some criticism to be had that when you open up the archives, that you don't actually get any solid information about what this stuff does. Fortunately, once you've played the game once through or twice, through, actually, it's very easy to figure out what it does because it really just unlocks new stuff. So I actually think that's a real saving grace in the game, actually.
And I think it speaks volumes. This is one of the big changes our modders wanted. So we've always allowed modding in the game. It's a lot easier with the enhanced version we released in 2022 and much easier with the new tools we have now. But we had a limited number of technologies that you could mod. And like the number one request from modders was, we want to create more technologies. And so we opened that up and oh my gosh, are the modders coming through. You should check out the Emperor Wars mod that dropped this morning. I love that one of our modders had a mod ready to go the day after we launched on Steam. And so much of that is about all these even more freakish and cool technologies and convoluted tech trees. So yeah, if you want to see how the technologies could play out, check out the Emperor Wars mod.
Actually, Andrew, I've already had a quick look at that. It looks fascinating. If I can go back to the space travel and space combat and also the choke points in space and that whole aspect, then I would love to talk about the modding because the modding looks really, really special. And as you sort of mentioned, that it's called the Emperor's mod. That's the most recent one that's just come out. I think it's stickied on the Steam discussions as well by the looks of it there.
Yep, Emperor Wars mod.
Okay, yeah, cool. The thing I'd really like to ask is the idea of using singularities rather than fuel to actually drive the spaceships. I love that in this game, and I don't think I've ever seen that before, where you're not using something that's consumable to actually travel around. The consumable is how difficult it is to actually build your spaceships, which is incredibly expensive to build the spaceships. So that's the limiting factor in terms of actually getting your fleets together. But the idea of actually having singularities that then allow you to actually transport through these different warp gates is, I just love that idea. And it was something when I was live streaming the game that was also, people actually also really resonated with just how simple it made. Like in terms of micromanagement levels, it sort of meant that aspect of micromanagement just didn't exist in the game. I just wanted to say that I thought that was a really, really clever way of actually handling space combat. So you were talking there before about that, when you guys were sort of trying to figure out the way of actually making it work, from a lore perspective into a computer game perspective. Was the singularity something that also came out of that, or was that something that you guys had already sort of thought through that whole aspect in terms of it being part of the base lore?
Actually, so much of the setting came out of that decision that we wanted these choke points. It's like, okay, then what are we doing? We're at different ends of a wormhole. What's going on then? Again, focusing on the idea of the religious aspect, we wanted the way that humanity moved between the stars to feel almost divine inspired, to feel awesome in the ancient sense of the word awesome, to have this feeling about it. So this isn't in the computer game, but in the tabletop games, one of the major aspects is the fact that if you go through these jumps without special buffers, you have this incredible experience that may or may not be totally evil, or maybe it's divine inspired. People don't know, so they put these buffers on them. So we've got these jump gates that came from long before humanity, and they're almost objects of veneration in and of themselves. And you can see one in the opening cinematic at the start of the game. There's a small moon ahead of us. That's no moon. That sort of feeling to it. And the more we played with this idea, the more we felt that how humanity moves through space really needs to become integral to everything. And it's interesting you talked about the fuel thing. So when we changed to SegaSoft as a publisher, they actually want us to put fuel in the game. And it's like, no, it is kind of a violation of what we're trying to create with this. So there's a lot of management in the game. I'm the first one to agree with that. When people say you have to manage a lot of things in this game, I don't consider that a negative. That's what it is. But that was getting to be too much. And you're right. The singularities are, again, what are these objects of veneration? What are the things that really matter to a humanity that's gone up to the great heights of technology and then crashed back down? So that's a big part of why those singularities are there. And that is that interface between you and these almost godlike things sitting in space that may or may not be entities in and of themselves.
I think that the singularities and the fact that they're so difficult to build and also that ships in general come so late, relatively late in the game, unless you really push for them early on. It's a wonderful, natural anti-snowballing mechanic that doesn't feel gamey. It's lore-focused, and I think that 4X has got problems with snowballing. Yes, it's one of the inherent issues with the genre. And usually games designers kind of flake out and they go, okay, you can just have 3 cities. And it feels arbitrary and kind of unfun. And I think the way that Emperor of the Fading Suns, as you say, Andrew, it can potentially be a game with a lot to manage. And I do not see that as a problem. I don't like automating anything in turn-based games. So I like to play with it all because I feel like I retain the connection. And actually, with a game that this is potentially this complex, with this many planets to colonize, if you didn't have something like that in, it would be quite easy for you to just suddenly, within 20 turns, oh my God, I'm landed on 30 planets, and I'm trying to get the economy together on all these multiple planets all at once. It would be too much. I've noticed so many elements of the game where it's clear that you've thought about the pacing very, very carefully, and you've woven these mechanics in so that the game unfolds at a manageable pace that introduces the player to the game without really swamping them with stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And you're catching on to a good point of this. I mean, the tech tree is very important, and you can rush one aspect of it. You can rush to get spaceships. You can rush to get the best infantry, the best tanks. You can rush to get the plague bomb. So that takes a while, and we'll have all sorts of ramifications if you do. But if suddenly you have a bunch of spaceships, you don't have the right troops on them, other players are just going to walk in and take them from you when you land on their planets or on a contested world. You need to have the backup units to go with it. So I see a lot of different arguments over which is the best tech path to go. And that, to me, means that we did what we wanted to do. I'd like to do kind of a balance. I'm doing from over here and over here and over here and moving up everything. I'll drop a few of the techs and focus on 3 or 4 main paths, but not just one. But you can try just going straight up one and considering that your preferred way of playing. So I'm just glad that you got so many different ways to try, and they all are valid, even in multiplayer.
Actually, even just to sort of recap what Ben said, I agree 100% with what Ben said, and that's extremely rare. So, but with the tech trees, it's interesting because it's complex but not overwhelming, and not in the tech trees, just the resources. I really quite like the way that the whole resource system actually does work. And also, is it a recent addition that you've sort of added in the ability to then have global resources where you essentially don't have to micromanage them on a planet by planet aspect? It's something that was something that when I was live streaming, I had it on anyway, but people were saying, oh, you really should for your first games, make sure that you're not actually having to micromanage where food goes, for example. Now, that's something that in most games I actually end up really liking managing logistics, but it was good to not have to worry about it just as you sort of start to play. Was that a recent addition?
It was in the first edition. It was a late add to the first version of the game. So it's very funny because the game we just released with Microprose I mentioned was Machiavelli the Prince. And it's all about trading and taking stuff from place to place. All right, well, I shouldn't say that's all. That's the significant part of the game. Really, it's all about assassinating other people in Venice and getting yourself elected pope and things like that. For this game, we started out with the idea you had to move everything around with you. And even for us, that got to be a lot. And we realized quickly that new players would really suffer making sure there was enough food for their invasion group, making sure that they weren't starving everywhere. We added the universal warehouse late in development. But yeah, new players, you need that. If you've been playing it all along, you can do universal warehouse off. And it adds a great level of fun to the game, making sure you've either got that food with your troops or you're grabbing a farm right off the bat, or you're grabbing some sort of food producing city right off the bat. But if you're playing it for the first time, universal warehouse on. If you've played a few times, then turn that universal warehouse off and have a whole new experience. And that's one of the things I like about this game. We put so many different things you can change, even without modding it, to make it a whole different game. Which house you choose will have a dramatic difference on how the game plays for you. So we made it for us to keep playing forever and ever. And the fact that I'm still playing this after having developed it literally 30 years ago, speaks a lot.
Well, the usual way to do that for a developer to make a game that is something that they can play over and over is to put procedurally generated content in. And there is some of that in this, in the sense of the random maps. However, I think the other way to do it, which is what you've done, is just to create this incredibly asymmetric situation where every house has a different start. you're kind of like nudged towards playing Lee Halan, I think, with the tutorial. And that's how I played the first time I played the game. I'm playing again now with Decados, which is completely different because they start in this swamp world. And they've just got a completely different approach towards making income at the start of the game while you're trying to get together. I just think it's so great. One of the big complaints, again, that we have in the 4X community about 4X games is that as you go through, you often sort of start to autopilot stuff because there's so much to manage. You start losing your connection with the game. So, you're starting to rush through your turns. I think with a game with lore as deep as this and such different mechanics each time you play, depending on not mechanics, but different setups and the different approach towards the game, depending on who you play, it really keeps you connected with the game. And I think that just all goes into this kind of really, really fine product that you've created, man. Yeah,
appreciate that. And we're talking about the difficulties with it as well. So all of these are things you can turn on and off. There's a difficulty level in the game, and you set the difficulty different for each house. It makes it different for that house, and then sets the universal difficulty. But things like which universal warehouse on or off is a difficulty matter. Plague on or off is a difficulty matter. Famine on or off. And then the starting house is a difficulty level and stuff. We set those 5 across the board. They're in order when you come in. Which one do you want to play? And when we designed it, the idea was Lee Halan would, for a new player, be the easiest. And Al Malik, for a new player, would be the hardest. Once we had experience, it would balance out pretty well. And as you played, you'd go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and you would be learning more about the universe, just like you're talking about, getting more of the law, and you'd want to play that way through. And I see a lot of players are doing, I played that house, now I got to play this house. And I think you're exactly right. That lore keeps people going, wanting to come back and actually experience the difference between each of these worlds, each of these houses, and so on.
Yeah, it's fascinating, actually. I didn't realize that the order of the houses was actually structured that way. That's actually very, very interesting to know, actually, just from a new player perspective. The thing that strikes me about these sorts of games, and it's something that, it's a passion project for you, and I love that. I absolutely love games that are beyond just, sort of trying to make some dollars out of something. And it's something that you obviously thoroughly love and enjoy. And it's one of the things that attracts me to games like this a lot. But one thing you sort of mentioned about, you've played it and played it and played it for such a long period of time. The one thing that I was a bit surprised about, I guess in one sense for me, I love procedural content in games, but the planets themselves, there's not a real lot of procedural aspects to them, or am I completely missing the mark there? The only procedural aspect I can think is really what the content of the ruins are, but the ruins still stay up in exactly the same position every time you play it, or am I missing something?
For the core worlds, they stay the same. It was just too hard to balance out Merchant League because the independent factions have a major role in the game. You've got agores where you buy and sell your resources. And the Merchant League actually has to physically fly between the stars to restock these. And if we don't have enough ships, if it's not set up right, those agores are gone right off the bat. And that can be a major pain for your game. So the key worlds we had to keep the same. Now, with most of our previous games, Hammer of the Gods, Machiavelli, Merchant Prince, we gave you the option to have fully random worlds. Either do the Earth or have a fully random world, and you could change the parameters on it for how you wanted the random world generation to work. And for like games like Battles of Destiny, we'd supply you a map editor so you could make your own as well. For this one, the key worlds, just to keep all these various elements working together properly, we had to keep those planets and what was on them, how many Merchant League ships there were, how many Holy Church ships there were, the resources you had to begin the game with. We had to keep those pretty well fixed.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's cool. And we're talking this number. I forget how many different planets there are. There's heaps and heaps of planets. So I'm guessing you're talking about the first 6 or 7 planets, like the 6 or 7 planets that the players are starting from. Is that correct? So all the other planets,
those plus Byzantium, Secundus, Leagueheim, Holy Terror, Stigmata.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's really quite cool. Now, actually, I guess sort of thinking of the things that I would like when I was playing the game, I was thinking, actually, I would really like to see this or really like to see that. One aspect, and I think that Ben also feels the same, is I find in combat, I'm actually not really understanding fully how the phasing is worked because I'm not getting an actual detailed combat log. Is that something that that you've thought about, or is it something that may come at some point in the future? At the moment, it's sort of it just shows you a screen where it's going to go through the phases. And one thing that struck me, again, from somebody who loves playing these sorts of games, is that I like to know what each phase is doing. Even if it's a little bit hidden, I still like to be able to go back and unlock it and have a look and see, okay, well, this die roll occurred at this particular phase because it was, doing direct combat as opposed to close combat. And that sort of aspect, it seems to just cycle through without actually being able to go back and analyze what actually has happened.
Yeah, our modders definitely want that. There's a little tool that they've come up with to show you in advance what's going to happen between different unit stacks when you pair them up, and just run the numbers straight through, do this quick spreadsheet, see what's going to happen when you have 10 morph dive bombers versus a mega tank, assault gun, 5 infantry, a fanatic legion, and a dervish, that kind of thing. It is something that a lot of modders want. And what the modders want has driven a lot of what our development process has been. So I'm not going to say it's happening immediately, but it's definitely high on the we would like this list.
Well, for once, in an uncharacteristic fashion, I'm going to back Daz up here and completely, say please do that. That would be great if we could get, even if it was just, some kind of combat log that you could see with, what was going on. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but I think that would go a long way towards unraveling the combat. Now,
actually, sorry, Ben, it does have to be it does have to be detailed.
Okay, Daz wants it detailed, but I agree. I think you've created a really super crunchy and interesting combat system, and there's all these different phases. You've got this wonderful rank system where different units are more likely to be hit than others, and then you've got the spies, and the assassins, which can attack back rank characters. It's so cool. I think it's just a really, really great combat system. I want to be able to follow it a little bit more because, in a big battle, it just goes by so quickly. And I think maybe the more you play it, the more that you'll kind of get used to it. But I think particularly for beginners, it would be quite useful to be able to sort of see what's going on there. But yeah, I do like the combat system. I think it's really fun.
And one of my late game battles I love, and I haven't unfortunately done the latest live stream I'm doing, is Doppelganger Assassins versus Blade Master Nobles, which is where we're really
I love those things.
Getting into the fun stuff. The focus on the combat was always, how do we do combined arms correctly? So we did this in Battles of Destiny, and we admitted at the time we did it well. We didn't get it exactly right. And with this game, that was how do you really put everyone in there? And I mean, in the real world, in real world wars, there is this kind of rock, paper, scissors thing going on. If there's infantry on the battlefield, run tanks against them. If there are tanks coming at you, run airplanes against them. If there are airplanes flying overhead, get some AA set up. If there's AA out there, get artillery shooting them, etc. So we wanted to ensure that this game reflected real world combat. You need to have combined arms. Let's go back to the tech tree as well a bit. For us, the idea was the optimal strategy would be balanced, though you could try all these other things. Let me just send my armor straight on in. And people who've watched my live streams have seen me having Prince Alexius riding around on a mega tank taking over fiefs. But like the tech, like your resources, you can go one or two specific routes where you can try and balance them. And we tended to mechanically favor balance, even though each of these routes is legitimate and can be fully successful on its own.
Yeah, it's fascinating, actually, just with combined arms. It really is a big feature of the game. And I think with this enhanced version, correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't ever play the original game, but the players worked out that they just needed to have artillery and one other unit, and they could actually then ruffle stomp through the game. Again, I used to get a lot of comments, I was getting comments when I was actually live streaming the game saying, oh, have they rebalanced the units? And it was a resounding yes, the things that you couldn't just run away with. I forget which 2 units it was, but there was 2 units that people said that if you only had those 2 units, you could actually go through the original game fairly easily. But that's no longer the case, is it? Like with the enhanced version, it's very, very much now with the combined arms really are very, very important.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So in the original game, really, it could be anything and artillery, because artillery was back rank. It would survive, but it would keep hitting you and keep hitting the enemy, keep hitting the enemy until someone get through it. So you just put other things in front of it as a buffer, let those other things die, and your artillery would slowly pound the other troops. This is a little bit of an issue with our Battles of Destiny game. We might have given artillery a little bit too much range, and therefore they had a little bit too much of effect as a result. But in the new game, and I had this happen in the stream recently, it cracked me up, because, I mean, obviously I'm not using artillery all the way because we have changed it. But I had one big fight on Byzantium Secundus where the Al-Malik were sending all their spies to kill my noble. They're going to assassinate a giant stack of spies. I said, I'll show you how I deal with that. Let me send out this stack of artillery. And it did not work nearly like I expected because we had changed it. The spies were getting in the back of the artillery and sabotaging them. So I was very funny to be hoisted on my own petard with that one. That, let me show you the artillery in action. Whoops, I just lost a whole bunch of units.
Yeah, that's quite funny. It's funny, we're also mentioning different words and names and things like that if somebody hasn't played the game before, they're not going to really understand. And Byzantium Secundus, the whole idea of what Byzantium Secundus is again, just from a lore perspective, from a gameplay perspective, is really fascinating to have essentially like a planet that starts off where you can't do combat and then it sort of slowly escalates. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that new players often have a hard time getting their heads around. Because if you come into 4X, explore, expand, exploit, exterminate, and all about resources, explore, see where the resources are, expand your control over resources, exploit those resources to create stuff, exterminate your enemies, you get that idea of you start with one unit and by the end you've got this giant empire. And that was another thing we wanted to turn on its head. This is humanity that's collapsed. You can't rebuild that stuff. You start with these core, very good units, your assault landers, your cruisers, maybe a Grim Sun, maybe a plane, maybe some tanks. And you can't really rebuild these things yet. You don't have the tech, you don't have the resources. You've got to balance this out. Do you risk these units right off the bat to do a Zerg rush equivalent, a medium tank rush, a smiter rush? Let's go with that, Pitbull rush. Or do you use them very sparingly until you can build them up? Both legitimate strategies, and both can fail and both can succeed. So, and that ties into Byzantium Secundus. Your best units start on this planet where you can't fight. So what are you going to do with them? Well, if you take them all off, you suddenly realize that you can fight on Byzantium Secundus with spies. And the enemy is going to send a bunch of spies with you if you empty out your forces on Byzantium Secundus. So while it appears to be a place you can't fight, you still have to be very careful how you handle it. And of course, late game, if anyone's been watching my Prince Alexius Redemption live streams, you see that Byzantium Secundus becomes the place for battles. And it was hilarious. One of my recent live streams where I had my nice little stack moving on Byzantium Secundus finally fighting, and then my main enemy suddenly had this massive beast attacking that I couldn't research and I didn't know they had. So suddenly the epic battles were taking place on this world that early on seemed to be... It's interesting because early in the game, that means Byzantium Secundus is a place you can use to hide damaged spaceships and damaged units. If you need to get away from attack, just run to Byzantium Secundus and no one will attack you there.
That's a clever idea. I wouldn't have even thought of that. That's really, really clever.
It is a way to give players who are being pounded a place to go and not be pounded.
And again, the lore is just, it sets these situations up, doesn't it? You know, you've created some absolutely unique game systems that you just don't get in other 4X games, where they tend to give you like a set of, you know, like kind of predictable mechanics, predictable circumstances within which you then go and explore within those particular rule sets. What you've got in Emperor of the Fading Suns is like all these different factions, like the Vow and the Symbiotes. You know, they do their own thing. You got the Church and the League. They throw a spanner into the works. And man, the League really wreck you if you don't, you know, if you give them too much money, or the Church, you upset the Church, you know. And again, with Byzantium, it's just another thing. The lore has created this wonderful situation to give you unique gameplay. I really can't think of any other game other than maybe Alpha Centauri, you know, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, that really gives what is essentially a very hardcore grand strategy 4X game such an immersive feel, where you don't feel the need to necessarily play optimally. I mean, really, you get all the optimal units right at the start of the game. A lot of the stuff that you're researching is kind of cool stuff that's strong, but it's also flavoursome. So you're really, like, I think it really leads into this storyline that you're creating for yourself, and it really does feel like playing a strategy RPG. And I'm sorry, this is a really bad interview because I'm just gushing at you now, Andrew, but I think it's really important to point that out, that this this game was years ahead of its
Actually,
time.
no, you're doing a great job there, Ben. And again, that's I just wanted to. I was just thinking. Actually, you're saying exactly what the game is. So you might be. It might seem like you're gushing, but it's actually the game really does have. Like from that lore perspective, really does set itself up. So, no, I don't think that you're gushing at all. So, I was actually just there nodding away, thinking, "Yeah, you're really nailing this." So, no, I think
we need to get a thermometer. I think Daz is sick.
Yeah, I'm gagging.
Well, I do want to thank Daz actually because he streamed it a week ago, and it was very funny seeing this eye-opening experience that he was having, and we got our most wishes since we'd been in the Steam Next Fest during his stream. So
that's cool. Thanks.
That's great. Yeah, I can't wait to play this one on my channel. It's finding a space for it, but man, as soon as this came out on GOG, well, at least the previous version, I was like, I've got to play this game, and because it's so long, and I play quite a lot of other long strategy games. I think you feel like you're getting yourself in for, a big mission. However, I had a lot of time today to play this, and I got a long way in about 6 hours. Like, I got a long way. I actually think that the game was, I think the community overestimates how complex and large it is. I think it does get complex towards the end, sure. But actually, like Daz and I play a game called Shadow Empire, for example, and it's no way as long and as complex as that. Emperor of the Fading Suns is actually really, 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 well designed. And you can play it pretty quickly once you know what you're doing.
yeah, there are definite ways to speed rush it if you play everything on easy. We made sure that our demo for it ends after 20 years. I don't think you can win it in the demo time, though I'm certainly interested for someone to prove me wrong. But it doesn't take that many more turns after if you want to speed rush and have everything on easy. Now, and that's on purpose. What we see is a lot of new players. Really, I can't deny it. There's a real learning curve to this game. And part of that is all those units you have right at the start. You're not used to it. The classic game progression curve is the game, as your skills improve, the curve of the game difficulty is supposed to go with it. We throw you a lot of stuff at the beginning before you have those skills. So we consciously break the classic game progression curve. But again, this was aimed initially for existing strategy gamers. And we're very glad that a lot of folks who are not strategy gamers have picked it up and stayed with it and gotten into it accordingly. But if you start changing all those different knobs and gadgets and gigas we give you to change the difficulties, you're not going to be able to speed rush this one.
Yeah, I think you're nailing it there. It's the complexity is there, but it's not as complex as a lot of other games. But the immersion is really, really deep. And it's funny because you very quickly lose sight of the fact that the feel and graphics of the game look fairly old, but they don't really get in the way of this whole immersion. Like you end up just being so deep into what's going on. And I love the fact that the scope of the game is just so big in terms of the actual planets. It's not just a simple little planet that you're taking over. In fact, most of the gameplay is really about the actual individual aspects of those planets, I guess.
Yeah, it was very much. I mean, I can't deny that we have this desire to have a whole nother game where you're just trying to rebuild one planet. So in the Fading Suns lore, there are all these lost worlds, and if you look in, we set a custom map along with the default game, which has all the Lost Worlds on it. And it is a giant map. If you haven't looked at it when you load custom map, take a look at it. It is amazing. There's Dark Ages, which is a small, easy map for multiplayer. I shouldn't say easy. It's just easier for multiplayer action to get confrontational really quickly. And then there's this giant map in there. And we always really at some point want to do this. You've got a lost world. You've been knocked back to the barbarian age. You rebuild it, and suddenly this emperor opens the jump gate, and now you're part of humanity, and you bring your forces out. Anyway, there's just been so many other things we want to do that are a bit pie in the sky right now.
Daz just said something that made me remember something that I wanted to bring up, because just talking about the overall presentation of the game and how good it looks still today, the late 90s was an awkward time for video games because 3D stuff was just starting to come in, and a lot of it has aged really badly. If you were to go and look at the game Wizardry 8, for example, and the really, really bad 3D graphics that it's got compared to how beautiful Wizardry 7 was, which came out in about 94 or something, and you'll see the difference. So, but somehow in Emperor of the Fading Suns, even after what you've told us with, not being able to go with the publisher, with Microprose, the sort of established heavyweight strategy game publisher that you were hoping to go with, you've somehow knocked it out of the park with the presentation. I mean, the music, I know Daz was talking about this before, the music is absolutely cracking. You've got decent 3D graphics in there. The 2D graphics are brilliant as well. The map graphics are not only good looking for the time, but they're also easy to read. I mean, there's some serious talent gone into this game, in my humble opinion, and I think the quality of the writing as well, the quality of the writing in the archives, is absolutely mind blowing. It just feels like a super polished product that would have come from. I mean, you guys are punching so above your weight in terms of the size of the studio.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we never passed double digits as a studio, so we were always we were definitely the definition of what indie is. And it's very funny you mentioned Wizardry, because that was Andrew Greenberg and Dave Bradley. Andrew Greenberg sadly is passed. Wonderful developer. I never got to work with. Dave Bradley's a friend of mine, but I appreciate what they were trying to do with the transition.
Oh, you're friends with David Bradley? No, sorry to interrupt. You're friends with David Bradley, man. Wizardry is one of my favorite games, man.
No, Dave's
the Wizardry series.
Dave's great. He's actually here in Atlanta as well. We'll have to set up another conversation. But with the graphics, I love that you caught that. So we were trying to move into 3D. So if you look at our Hammer of the Gods game, you actually see our very first 3D efforts in the cinematics. And what are our 3D efforts? It's a Viking longship that's not moving, but you can rotate around it. That was our very first 3D effort. And we were saying, all right, the industry is changing. We need to transition to 3D. So how do we do this? We do this 2D, 3D mashup where the gameplay is in the 2D that we already understand. We can start incorporating 3D into those unit graphics. And I love them for the time. And some of the spaceships, oh man, I love what the team did with those. Folks, they worked on it. It's just hilarious. I just remember that we would render tanks. There aren't many textures on our 3D stuff in game. There's a reason for that. The rendering was such a pain. We would leave our computers on overnight to render a single tank. And our computers weren't the best, but they weren't garbage. But we'd have to leave them all night to render a several hundred polygon sized tank, which is nothing by a modern computer. But yeah, so that intro that you see, we had a lot of fun with it. We loved it. Great voice actor, Durkron Tulane, did the VO for it. We had great folks helped us out with that. And the Segasoft people told us that when they had their first big event for buyers, remember, this is back in the days when games were sold in boxes and electronic boutiques and software, etc. And they played our intro. All these jaded old buyers stood up and applauded. They liked it so much. That was probably 96. The game came out in 97. This was a pre-release thing for them. So yeah, we had a lot of fun trying to integrate 3D. I think we did it relatively intelligently. Yeah, it looks dated now. There's no denying. There's a reason any human head you see, there's no hair on it, because we were not about to try and render hair at that time. But it was our effort to move between 2D and 3D. And then you see it again. We did the Warhammer game, Warhammer 40K Final Liberation. And you see more of our 3D evolving into that game.
That's a great game as well. A favorite of my friend Imperialis's. He loves that game a lot.
Yeah, had a lot of fun with that one too.
Actually, we're starting to run out of time. So, and I didn't want to miss the chance to talk about the modding aspect of the game and just how important that is to you, Andrew, because that seems to be something, as you've already said a few times now, that it's something that it's driving the game as much as anything that you're doing yourself. And I'd love to know more about, that connection with your community, with your modding community, the fact that you've got a mod that came out right on game launch, things like that. It's just, you give us a bit of a rundown as to your approach with modding, the connection you have with the community, maybe I think you've got a Discord server there that you, that's really quite active. Maybe if you can just talk a little bit about that aspect of the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this was one of the fortunate points when we combined to make Holistic Design between several dudes and with Bill and myself. They were already, they'd come out of a modding community themselves and were interested in trying to add more modding tools to the game. So they hadn't had a lot of them to date. You could build maps for Battles of Destiny, but the other games, not so much. Whereas Bill and I came out of the tabletop RPG industry, which in my opinion, the best way to think about it is you are creating tools for modders. Everybody playing your game is a modder. They're changing what you did. And yes, I like to think that what I created was good, but I'll never deny that what the players created was better, especially for them and their friends.
It's almost like you're bringing Dungeon Master tools in to make the most out of that sort of story. I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we consciously tried to do that better with Emperor of the Fading Sun. So I'll admit, you had to know what you were doing to use the original EFS modding tools, but some people did. And those were the people who kept this game alive for the years when we had no way to get it into distribution. So we launched the game with SegaSoft. They did 2 print runs of the game. So we know the first print run sold out. And they were amazed the first print run sold out. They hadn't had that happen with any of their other games. SegaSoft was Sega's attempt to get into the PC market, and it was not an area they knew well. So we were the first one to sell a full print run. They did a second print run, and then they shut down SegaSoft before we ever got royalty reports to see what they actually sold.
Oh, no. Did you never get paid?
We got paid. We never got royalties. And we knew we were due royalties, but that company is gone. So
heard this story so many times, man, from the 90s.
Yeah, we can tell you a few of those. The monies that are owed out there. Oh, well, anyway, so we had no way to get this game back into stores, physically beyond us. So by the time Valve comes around with Steam, we've all gone off to other projects. I'm doing consulting and I'm running the Georgia Game Developers Association. My partners are doing different projects. Bill was back doing stuff with the World of Darkness and so on. So it was very difficult to get the band back together. But modders were still loving this. Hyperion, Nova, Emperor Wars, all these great mods were out there that people were still enjoying and still working on. And Ken Leitner, one of our partners, myself, we did our best to give them tools, handed them our map editor so they could use it. The map editor didn't originally ship in the game. For all of you interested in modding, the map editor ships in the game. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we re-released the enhanced version 22 was give more mod tools and make it as easy as possible for people to mod. People could always go in and modify some of our data files to change things around. And we expanded that dramatically. There's so many files. And you can do this with any text editor. You have Notepad, you can get right to it and start changing things in the game. Name your enemies. Name one of the units after your enemies and blow it up. Name it after your friends. I love putting my friends' names into the games. This is something I would show when I was streaming. I'd pull up the files just to show how easy it was to change various aspects and change important aspects. I changed in one of the things which sects could do which powers, what modifiers they gave you. And you can make it a dramatically different game just with a text editor. And then you can get into it and start making your own maps. Very easy. The map editor is very easy to use. You have a lot of fun. Will Wright always has this great story about he made this game called Raid on Bungling Bay that I loved as a kid. But he said he had more fun playing around with his map editor than he did with his own game. And that's what SimCity comes out of. And I fully appreciate that. Get into a good map editor, start creating things. The act of creation by itself is so much fun. Start making your own map editors, and then you can do what the modders are doing, putting in their own art, adding more text, adding more planets, just doing so many dramatic things. And here, I think we now have the progression curve working correctly. You can start editing those DAT files and just change a name here, change a power, give a power upgrade here, give a power, nerf a unit that you think is overpowered, and then get into the map editor. And you're slowly learning how to mod as you move along. Yeah, you can very quickly become a modder yourself.
Well, guys, we're about running out of time. It's a real shame because, Andrew, you're a fascinating guy. And, you've just dropped some names, by the way, of games just casually during the course of this interview that really make me want to talk to you again. I mean, you're talking about Machiavelli, which is absolutely legendary in certain areas of the gaming community. I've still never played it. I just get told to play it all the time. And, knowing that you guys have had something to do with that, it's just really clever. And then obviously Vampire the Masquerade, which is, a legendary RPG.
Well, let me do one last bit of promotion then, because I should have done this all along. EFS just dropped on, Emperor of the Fading Sun just dropped on Steam, but these other games, Machiavelli the Prince, Battles of Destiny, Hammer of the Gods, they're all available on GOG and Zoom platforms. So check them out there. All under $10.
And yeah, just give us a bit of a blurb for the Steam release of Emperor of the Fading Sun's Enhanced then, please, Andrew.
Oh yeah, this is getting the game to where we wish it had been if we'd worked with microprose all the way through. Bugs are ironed out. Modding tools are beautiful. Multiplayer is fantastic. There's so many different levels of difficulty for you to play at. There's so much there for you to get your teeth into. There's a demo. Try the demo out. Demo's free, and the game itself is only $9.99. So you're not risking anything. Except all your time from here on. No, wait, no. You'll still get up to go to the bathroom, eat food. But other than that.
It's funny you mentioned microprose, actually. It's one of those things where, in one sense, you probably, like, when microprose was then sort of bought out, so many games, the IP of so many games were then sort of locked away, thinking of Master of Magic and things like that. And the intro of your game does remind me of the intro of Master of Magic. But, Master of Magic was just locked away for so many decades, and nothing could actually sort of be done with it. So it's great that you've been able to at least sort of work on the periphery of your game. It's really awesome.
In praise of good lawyers, we had a good lawyer who gave us these, made sure we had clause in so we could get these games back. And we had to go through the legal route. Thankfully, it didn't cost us very much, and we did. So,
oh, that's fantastic. Again, that's a whole other discussion, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I hate to see how many games have disappeared. I love that GOG's doing their archive project. Really, really support them in that, and hate to see so many games I love just gone.
Absolutely, completely agree. It's funny that you mentioned Master of Magic. I actually see quite a lot of design similarities between the Master of Magic and Emperor of the Fading Suns, but again, we're running out of time, so that'll be a conversation for another day, perhaps. Andrew Greenberg, thank you so much for joining Daz and I. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Really appreciate it. Have a great time and enjoy playing it some more.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This has been very, very interesting discussion. Thanks, Andrew. Not so much interesting from Benjamin's perspective, but certainly from yours.
Thanks, Daz. Well, this was Ben, Daz, and Andrew Greenberg for Meta Abuse. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.